Today, an incredible story of espionage, but first, an incredible sponsor message from Skillshare. But my first question to you has to be, do you have Skillshare yet? I mean, I really have talked about it a great deal on this channel. I've done many different spots like this for Skillshare, and that means that you guys like it because otherwise they would stop paying me, which means that you guys stick with it. So it's probably really good, and I can personally confirm it is really good. Alright, so look, maybe you haven't got Skillshare yet, and you are a totally skillless individual, and that's great. Because there are 29,000 courses on Skillshare for you to level up your design, business, video, social media, or, well, whatever skills. There are a huge range. There's 29,000 of them. Me personally, I've taken video production courses like I've talked about before. I've also taken a class on how to go viral, which I was super skeptical about, but it turns out it's totally legit. Lately, I've been on a bit of a productivity binge as I want to squeeze as much as possible out of every day. That's just how I roll. There is a great course on there from a guy called Thomas Frank, who's also a YouTuber, by the way, on getting more stuff done in a day. It's great stuff. It's worth checking out if you want to get more done in a day. It's kind of right there. That's productivity. That's what it's about. But yes, Skillshare, just go do it. It's also, you get 2 months for free if you go through our link below, and if you don't like it, no big deal. Just cancel if you don't want it. But I don't think you will cancel because it's pretty awesome, and it's only $10 a month if you don't cancel and you just continue with your subscription. So that's great. Support Biographics by supporting Skillshare. It's a good thing to do. Link below. 2 months for free for the first 500 people. And let's get into our spy story. If you have read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, or even if you only watched our video about Sun Tzu, you will know that above anything else, all war is based on deception. The story that we bring you today shows exactly that. This is the story of 3 individuals who, through imagination, cunning, and sheer cheek, were able to fool the secret services of half of Europe at the height of World War II. This is the story of the secret agent codenamed Garbo and his associates, and how they brought about the greatest deception of the war. This is a spy story, so be prepared for lies, for double-crossing, mysterious deaths, plot twists, and unreliable narrators. Now, before I start, I do have 2 requests for those of you who already know the story of Agent Garbo. 1, please don't post any spoilers in the comments. I know that you guys are like me. You watch a video, the first thing you do is scroll down and see what the comments at the top is. Please don't vote up the spoilers. It really does ruin the story. Number 2, I trust you guys. Number 2, even if you know the story by heart, please do give us a chance before you turn this video off. We've probably found a couple of things that you didn't know about one of the characters and why she deserves to be front and center. And look, I promise we're getting on with the video, but I do need to get another general warning. 1, there are plenty of Spanish names in this story. I'm going to do my absolute best to nail them. It's going to be tricky. I'm going to do it, though. Let's do it. Let me introduce the first character of this story, a little girl called Araceli González Carballo. She was born on the 6th of July 1914 in Lugo, Galicia in northwestern Spain. Her childhood and upbringing were fairly happy and largely uneventful as she was born into a well-to-do family. As she grew up, Araceli started to attract the attention of boys around her because of her astounding and fierce beauty, which made her look a bit like a movie star. Araceli's life, alongside the lives of 25 million Spaniards, changed forever on the 17th of July 1936 when the Civil War broke out. Now, I realize this is probably the first time we've ever talked about the Spanish Civil War on Biographics, so I'm just going to go through it really quickly just to jog your memory about it. The war pitted the legitimate Republican government in Madrid against a nationalist insurgency headed by General Francisco Franco. Both sides were supported by foreign volunteers and governments. The USSR provided aid to the communist fighters on the Republican side. This Stalinist faction was often at odds with the less extreme elements within the so-called Popular Front, which led to infighting, most notably in Barcelona and the Catalonia region. On the other hand, Italy and Germany were ideologically akin to Franco and the insurgents, so they sent units from their armed forces to fight on their side. In April 1939, Franco and his nationalist insurgents, they claimed victory over the Republic. The region of Galicia had been quickly taken over by the nationalists at the very beginning of the war, meaning Lugo would be spared the horrors of being on the front line. But there was still much to do on the home front. To the surprise of those who knew this posh and rather spoilt girl, Araceli enthusiastically volunteered in a military hospital in her hometown, emptying bedpans, peeling potatoes, and above all experiencing firsthand the misery of a modern war. She grew more mature after the experience and so decided to move away from home at the end of 1938. Her father found her a job as a secretary to the governor of the Bank of Spain in Burgos, the acting capital for the nationalists. It was here, in February of 1939, that she met a young officer. It was love at first sight. His name was Juan Pujol. Our second protagonist was born in 1912 in Barcelona into a progressive and liberal family. Juan and his brothers grew up influenced by their father's ideals: freedom, tolerance, love for your neighbor, and rejection of violence. With such an upbringing, you would imagine that at the outbreak of the Civil War, the 24-year-old Juan would join sides with the Republicans. But reality is not so clear-cut. Juan did initially serve with the Popular Front in Catalonia during the first months of the war, but he experienced firsthand the violent internal clashes between Republicans, Stalinists, and anarchists, as well as the terror-like tactics used in this struggle. This caused him to desert from the Republican Army, and after a brief stint as a chicken farmer near the French border, he joined the Francoist side. He served with the Nationalists until the end of the war as an officer in the Signal Corps. And as a Nationalist officer, he met, fell in love with, and married the beautiful Araceli. The Civil War ended with Franco's victory, and 5 months later, Germany invaded Poland. For several months, Germany and Italy tried to enlist Spain's help in their fight against the Allies, but Franco was no fool and kept out of the war, allowing only a contingent of volunteers to join Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941. But let's not jump too far ahead just yet. I'm going to rewind back to January of 1941, when a beautiful young lady walked into a German embassy and managed to arrange a meeting between a delegate and her husband, a veteran of Franco's army. I'm talking, of course, about Araceli and Juan. The German diplomat's name was Gustav Leisner, and he was the chief of the Abwehr for the Iberian Peninsula. The Abwehr was the intelligence service agency of the Wehrmacht, headed by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. Juan had a bold proposal for Leisner. He and Araceli would move to Lisbon, then to London, and off to spy for the Germans. What was the game of the Pujols? Well, it's possible to speculate that they did not agree with Spain's neutrality and wanted to do their part in the war, but Leisner did not care about their motives. The spy master was simply delighted to recruit a couple from a neutral country who could move freely to Britain. A couple which included a former nationalist veteran, an officer of the Signal Corps, no less. Leisner agreed to the deal and assigned agent Federico Nape to give Juan a crash course on intelligence work. He was taught how to use invisible ink to write his secret reports that were to be sent back to Madrid and to Berlin. Juan also learned how to encode his messages using the Enigma ciphers. Finally, he received instructions on what not to do. He and Araceli were not supposed to do any actual spying themselves. Rather, they were to recruit a spy network amongst British and foreign citizens who were sympathetic to the Axis cause. Everything, it was set. One last detail was missing. Juan would need a code name to sign his messages. And they asked, well, do you have any preferences? Yes, he had Araceli Bella, or Arabelle for short. In July of 1941, the Pujols were transferred to Lisbon. After acquiring false papers, they flew to London and set to work. Juan Pujol did not have any particular talents nor education, but he did have the gift of the gab, and his wife had a charming personality. Very quickly, they started recruiting a network of spies, some of them high up in the hierarchy of the British Admiralty and the Ministry of Information. The network included two Venezuelan brothers, Nazi sympathizers who were able to observe the Royal Navy's movements from Glasgow. In November of 1942, they were able to send an advance warning of Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa. Another notable agent included a Welsh nationalist, the founder of an underground fascist group called the Brothers of the Aryan World Order, which was operating in Swansea, South Wales. In the spring of 1944, the Abwehr received the most valuable report so far from Arabelle. The long-feared Allied invasion of France it was on its way. The joint British, Canadian, and American forces had created a new army group called FUSAG. This stood for the 1st US Army Group, a formidable force numbering 11 divisions under General Patton. FUSAG was amassing in southern England, and plans were being finalized for their landing in a location in northern France. Arabelle was able to disclose that location, which, as we all know, was Calais. Or was it? Now, at the beginning of this video, I did mention that this story features some unreliable narrators, and the first one, well, that would be me. You see, so far, I've told you the story from the perspective of Leisner and the other spies at the Abwehr. But let's trace back one of the very first reports sent by Arabelle from London. The ciphered message folds back up into its envelope, jumps back into the secure briefcase, and then into the postal plane, and so on until we are in the Pujols' room in London, with Juan composing the message at his desk. The cool breeze moves the curtains, allowing us to see just outside the window. But what we see is not Big Ben or Piccadilly Circus, and Juan is not munching on some fish and chips. No, what we see is the Tour de Bellum, and the Pujols are having breakfast with pastéis de nata. The fact is, the Pujols had never left Lisbon for London. So what's going on? Well, let's rewind even further to the start of the war in Europe. Even though Araceli and Juan were on the Francoist side at the end of the war, neither of them was fully supportive of the regime. Araceli simply found herself in nationalist territory, while Juan had switched sides as a reaction to the violence in Barcelona. The young couple was concerned about the spread of Nazi ideology throughout Europe and had decided that they needed to take some sort of action. It's not entirely clear to us how they came to this idea, but in the winter of 1940 to 1941, Juan approached the British Embassy in Madrid to offer his services as a spy. As we all have heard in many a job interview, Juan was told, "Thanks, we appreciate the enthusiasm, but we're looking for someone with a little bit more experience." What happened next was all thanks to Araceli's genius. The plan was to approach the Germans instead, which happened successfully in January of 1941. The idea was that they would offer to spy for them instead. Once Juan had gained their trust, they could then contact the British again and work for them as double agents. It's actually pretty brilliant. Not only were they going to build up some work experience, but they would be able to offer His Majesty's Secret Services a valuable skill, a channel of communication with the Abwehr to feed false information to. In July of 1941, they settled in Lisbon and never left for London. But what about their spy network? What about the Venezuelan brothers and the Welsh fascist? What about the detailed reports which earned Juan the praises of the Abwehr? Well, it was all fake. A fabrication, hokum, poppycock, malarkey, codswallop, mumbo jumbo. Juan's gift with words transferred into writing. He was able to compose from scratch more than 400 letters and 2,000 wireless messages, all based on magazines and newspapers available in neutral Lisbon. With only the help of his creativity, he was able to create an imaginary network of spies. To ensure that the Abwehr would trust Juan's activities, Araceli had another brilliant idea. The Abwehr in Madrid were unaware that she had left with Juan, so she returned to the Spanish capital and met with Federico Nappe. She broke into tears, saying that her husband had suddenly disappeared. Had he abandoned her and their newborn son? She knew that Juan had met with Federico several times, and maybe he could help her finding him. Nappe could not resist the tears of a beautiful young lady, and he reassured her Juan was in London carrying out a delicate mission on behalf of the Reich, and Araceli should be proud of him. And with that, well, now she had the Abwehr in her pocket. Araceli and Juan were reunited once again in Lisbon, and he continued sending his coded messages to his spy masters. Juan's boldness and sheer cheek got to the point of asking for pay raises from the Abwehr, lest his non-existing agents stopped collaborating. The Pujols ended up receiving £20,000 from the Abwehr. That's about $1.2 million in today's money. Juan came up with the story that he had been offered a job in the Ministry of Information thanks to some guy called Brendan Bracken, a personal friend of the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. Thanks to this job, he was able to get access to even the office of the Lord Admiral Louis Mountbatten. By February 1942, MI6 began intercepting Arabelle's messages via Ultra, the decryption program at Bletchley Park that had cracked the Enigma code. They soon realized that a German agent was based in Lisbon but was actually pretending to be in London. He was also feeding the Abwehr false but credible information. Around the same time period, Araceli planned her next move. In a way, she was the literary agent to Juan's creative genius. She produced evidence that Juan had secured the trust of the Germans and told Rousseau that they were now willing to cooperate with the British Secret Services. Rousseau contacted MI6, who were now aware of Arabelle's activities. MI6 agreed to recruit the Pujols, who received another code name, this time Bovril. An operation was put in place to smuggle the Pujols to Gibraltar and then to England. Juan adopted a new look to avoid any chance of recognition. He shaved his head and wore glasses and a beard. Now, I don't know about you, but I think he looks pretty great like that, but I might be biased. Anyhow, the Pujols landed in Plymouth on the 24th of April 1942. At the docks, they were met by the third protagonist of our story, the MI5 handler who would effectively become Juan's fellow co-author, Agent Thomas Harris. Now let's look at the events of 1942 to 1944 from the point of view of the Pujols and MI5. Harris christened Juan with his third and final codename. Because of his ability to impersonate so many different characters on paper, he was called Agent Garbo, after Swedish actress Greta Garbo, who was considered the greatest at that time. Pujol and Harris's strategy was to continue building the Germans' trust by giving them so-called chicken feed, which is basically accurate military information but of little to no strategic value. Working together, they wrote 315 letters averaging 2,000 words each. They also invented 27 sub-agents, each with full life stories, such as our old friends, the Welsh fascist and the Venezuelan brothers in Glasgow. According to the official history of British intelligence in World War II, the Adver became so flooded with reports from the Garbo spy network that they made no further attempts to infiltrate Great Britain. In November of 1942, Harris and Pujol dared one masterstroke to secure the Germans' trust once and for all. In anticipation of Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa, they compiled a report from the Venezuelans in Glasgow that a convoy of warships had been seen leaving port in distinctive Mediterranean camouflage. The message was sent by airmail postmarked well before the Torch landings and timed to arrive too late to provide the German high command with advance warning. The information, it was accurate, but it was useless. Still, the Germans were delighted and communicated back to Garbo, "We are sorry they arrived too late, but your last reports were magnificent." While Juan was writing away in the MI5 offices, Araceli was adjusting to life in London, which was not easy considering a second child had been born in the meanwhile. Initially, everything was pretty great. She even got to meet the Duchess of Kent. She also got to meet the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. But soon, the long hours spent at home and nostalgia for her country of origin, it took its toll. In June of 1943, Araceli wanted desperately to return to Spain and threatened Thomas that lest she could do so, she would reveal the whole Garbo ruse to the Spanish embassy. Juan and Thomas had to act quickly, and they concocted another plan. An MI5 officer informed Araceli that Juan had been arrested following a violent altercation with the spy masters whom he accused of mistreating her. She was blindfolded and driven to Camp 020, the infamous MI5 interrogation center where she had a tearful reunion with Juan, who appeared disheveled and downtrodden. Araceli promised through her tears that she would do her best to cooperate from that moment onwards. All she wanted was for MI5 to agree to release her husband. The cunning plan, it had been successful, and here is a lesson for all you newlyweds out there. There is no marriage crisis that can't be overcome with the help of an overly complicated plan and a convincing disguise, and an MI5 handler. In January 1944, Juan received a message from the Adver. They knew that the Allies were preparing a large-scale invasion of Western Europe. They needed their best agent, Arabelle, to keep them informed of developments. This set the stage for Garbo's masterpiece. It was true, of course, that a massive landing was scheduled for June 1944, Operation Overlord. The Allies knew very well that its success depended on fooling the Germans on the exact location of the landing. A parallel operation was put into place, Operation Fortitude, and Garbo would be at its center. Between January 1944 and D-Day, over 500 radio messages passed from Juan to the Abwehr with the intent of A. concealing the real status of Overlord's preparations, and B. persuading Berlin that the invasion force would land in Calais rather than Normandy. The deception, it was made even more convincing by the invention of a ghost army, FUSAG, the 11 division supposedly led by Patton. FUSAG was to be stationed in the county of Essex, East London, the natural staging grounds for an invasion of Calais. The Allies even created inflatable tanks and other bogus equipment to fool German reconnaissance aircraft. The German high command swallowed Garbo's lies like chilled Bavarian beer on a hot evening. Normandy's beaches were well defended, of course, but that was part of the Atlantic Wall system of defense. The majority of the mechanized divisions in northern France, they were kept at Calais, ready to repel FUSAG. D-Day, it arrived. On the early hours of the 6th of June 1944, American, British and Canadian forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. The battle, it was gruesome. More than 4,400 men died on the Allied side and up to 9,000 on the Axis side. But it could have been much, much worse. Under Erwin Rommel's insistence, the divisions were ready to move from Calais to Normandy, but he was overruled by the commander-in-chief, Marshal von Rundstedt. Another report from Arabelle, or Garbo if you like, had reassured high commands that the attack in Normandy was purely a diversionary maneuver. It was better that the tanks stay in Calais, ready for Patton's arrival. Juan was so convincing that up until August, the Germans kept 2 armored divisions and 19 infantry divisions in Calais, ready to welcome Patton's ghost army. But how did the advert react when the Allies never landed in Calais? Well, here's another Garbo masterpiece. He convinced them that the diversionary maneuver in Normandy had been so successful that the Calais invasion, it had just been aborted. On July the 29th, 1944, Juan received a surprising further message from the Abwehr. He had been awarded the Iron Cross by the Führer himself for his extraordinary services to Germany. And as if one award was not enough, in December of 1944, Juan was appointed member of the Order of the British Empire by the Security Services Director General, Sir David Petrie, in recognition of his services. Juan, Araceli, and Thomas had been at the forefront of an operation that had guaranteed the Allies' victory in Europe. It was one of those rare cases when actually the pen was mightier than the sword. Juan and Araceli, they returned to Madrid. Juan became paranoid about the Germans finding out about his identity. He feared some ex-Nazis or neo-Nazis could exact their revenge. Araceli was more practical. She just walked into the German embassy in Madrid and collected the last sum due to Arabelle, which she knew was still waiting for them. 25,000 pesetas, or about $20,000 in today's money. The couple then moved to Lugo and from there to Venezuela. This was Juan's decision, who was still paranoid about being exposed as a spy. But life in Venezuela, it did not suit Araceli, and the couple, they grew apart. By 1948, they had formally separated, and Araceli was living in Madrid with their 3 children in a penthouse provided by the British government. It was there that in early 1949, Juan, apparently on a secret mission in Angola, had disappeared and was presumed dead in mysterious circumstances. His former handler and friend, Thomas Harris, had quit MI5 after the war. In the following years, he could never shake off the suspicion of being part of the spy ring known as the Pilby Five, a group of MI5 traitors headed by Kim Pilby who were spying on behalf of the Soviet Union. However, there is absolutely no evidence of his involvement. Thomas died in a car accident in Mallorca, Spain in 1964, and for once, it seems like there were no mysterious circumstances. In the meanwhile, in Madrid, Araceli had started building a new life for herself and the children, working as a guide and interpreter for the British and American embassies. In 1956, she met and fell in love with American entrepreneur Edward Chrysler, a former body double for film star Rodolfo Valentino, who was now interested in developing the Spanish tourist industry. The two opened a successful souvenir shop in the same year, married in 1958, expanded into art galleries in 1965, all the while spying on behalf of the CIA, at least according to rumors by the newspaper El País. Edward formally adopted Juan and Araceli's 3 children, who grew up and had children of their own. Life just went on. Francisco Franco died in 1975. King Juan Carlos's democracy was restored, and Spain hosted the Football World Cup in 1982. Then on a September morning in 1984, Juan Chrysler, also known as Juan Pujol Jr., heard something on the radio that left him stunned. Juan Pujol, Agent Garbo, the greatest Spanish spy, was still alive and had just appeared in Great Britain in order to formally collect the Order of the British Empire that he had received at the end of the war. This had been Juan's final ruse. He had faked his death with the help of British intelligence to then return to Venezuela incognito and start again from scratch. He had remarried in Caracas and had fathered 3 more children. Juan was extensively interviewed by the Spanish media, but never gave an explanation to his action, except that he wanted to rebuild his life. Maybe he had concrete reasons reasons to fear retribution, maybe from ex-Nazis who escaped to South America, or maybe it was just a way for him to get a divorce Pujol style. After all, divorce was illegal in Spain until the 1970s. And one thing we learned about Juan, if he could overcomplicate something, well, he absolutely would. Whatever the reason for his disappearance, his children in Madrid welcomed him back and built a relationship which effectively had never really been there before. They even flew back to Venezuela with him and met their half-siblings. Our story ends shortly after this reunion. Juan died in 1988, followed by Araceli in 1990, both of natural causes. Juan Pujol Garbo is celebrated in espionage literature as one of the great spies, if not the greatest spy of the 20th century. And, well, we're not going to argue with that. But Araceli's exploits have only recently been celebrated, and this is because, being a good spy, she was very good at keeping quiet. So how about we remember both of them as the spies of the century? Before you go, please do leave us a comment below. If somebody was to film the story of Garbo, who would you like to see in the leading roles? Do let us know below. Also, the best thing you can do right now, go check out Skillshare. It's amazing. It supports this show. It's a good thing to do. There is a link below. 2 months for free for the first 500 people who do that. And as always, thank you for watching.